And we are going to say the pledge of allegiance to the flag, which is to the left of our capital, to the right of the seat of the audience. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The next person we hear from is Ms. Kaepernick.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So what is the reason that we are here today? You can mull over that. We hope that after seeing the slides, it will help you better understand why we are here. I know this is awkward, face the seats forward, but of course the screen is to your side, so you will either need to turn your head, turn your body to see the screen. So we will begin our theme of race and justice by examining what mass incarceration looks like in our nation's confinement and incarceration system. Sadly, the United States locks up more people per capita than any other nation. Just counting people. The American criminal justice system holds about 2.3 million people in 1,719 state prisons, 102 federal prisons, 1,852 juvenile correctional facilities, 3,163 local jails, and 80 Indian country jails as well as in military prisons, immigration detention facilities, civil commitment centers, state psychiatric hospitals, and prisons in the United States territories. This data slide was recently compiled and released by the Prison Policy Initiative on March 14th. While this pie chart provides a comprehensive snapshot of our correctional system, the graphic does not capture the enormous churn in and out of our correctional facilities and the far larger universe of people whose lives are affected by the criminal justice system. Every year, 626,000 people walk out of prison gates, but people go to jail 10.6 million times each year. Jail churn, as it is called, is particularly high because most people in jails have not been convicted. Some have just been arrested and make bail in the next few hours or days, and others are too poor to make bail and must remain behind bars until their trial. Only a small number held in our jails have been convicted, generally serving misdemeanor sentences under a year. Now we have a picture of Charlotte-Mecklenburg jail. All right. On any given day, 1,400 to 1,700 men, women, and youth are held in the county jail here in Mecklenburg County, or jails. The numbers are generally higher on the weekends. Each day, a jail population report is distributed to key court officials. Let's take a look at a recent and typical day, Friday, June 8th. On June 8th, 2018, the total jail population was 1,574. This slide provides a racial and ethnic breakdown of those in the Mecklenburg County jail population. So as you can see, has a higher stay in jail. So for Caucasians, 348 persons, or 22.1%. African Americans, 1,066 persons, or 67.7%. Hispanic, Latino, 145 persons, or 9.2%. Other or not recorded, 15 persons, or 1%. So would you agree that there is an overrepresentation of African Americans just right here in Mecklenburg County? All right, so here's a breakdown by gender. Males, 1,444, 91.7% of the population. Females, 130 persons, 8.3%. More statistics. Of the 16 to 17-year-olds, 48 were male and 4 were female. 18 to 24 years of age, 355 persons. 25 to 34 years of age, 610. 35 to 44 years of age, 342 persons. 45 to 54, 194 persons incarcerated. 55 and over, 79 persons. Notice that the majority are being held pre-trial, as it's been earlier stated, meaning that they have not been convicted of the offense for which they are being held. On average, those charged with a felony are held 147 days pre-trial. So just think about that. That's taking a man away from his family, his wife, his children, his job. On average, those charged with a misdemeanor are held 35 days in jail awaiting trial. Most are being held pre-trial because they do not, or their families do not have the resources to bond them out of jail. Each day they are subject to a $10 jail fee if they are found guilty. And if they aren't working, then how will they pay that fee at the end when they're released? So many leave jail owing the courts money for their stay. So think about it. What is the profile of the person most likely to be housed in jail? So as we look at this slide, looks like just a small schoolboy in a classroom. This is a cover of the spring 2013 edition of Teaching Tolerance by the Southern Poverty Law Center. They touched on the school-to-prison pipeline and some solutions. The reason why we want to leave you with this one is because it's time for us to think even harder about African American and Hispanic young males in middle school and high school. They're trying to do the best they can in an environment that seems to be stacked against them. What are we going to do to help with the situation? That's the big question. Thank you.
Good afternoon. This afternoon, we have a fabulous panel that is going to talk to us different aspects of systemic control, those things in our system that lead to some of this incarceration data that we have seen. We have 4 panelists here. Mr. Henderson Hill, who is a criminal defense attorney, will talk a a little bit of history first about black codes, which were established after the Civil War, poll taxes after the creation of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, which permitted us to vote, and so the system had to find a way to deter us from voting. And then he will talk about his current project, the 8th Amendment Project. Next to Mr. Hill is Mr. Spencer Merriweather, who many of you will recognize as our newly elected district attorney, or he will be in November since he has no opposition. Mr. Merriweather is going to talk to us about bias in the criminal justice system. The next gentleman is the mayor of Marshville, but he has a history prior to his entry into politics. He was incarcerated, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about how he got from incarceration to leading a city in our state. And our final speaker is Mr. Adrian Sundiata, who also has a history of being incarcerated, and he will talk to us about how he got from there to the successful person that he is today. Each of them will have approximately 10 minutes to present. We will take questions at the conclusion of the fourth speaker. So you might want to write down your questions if you have them of 1, 2, or 3, and you can remember what your question was. And I'm sure this is going to be a free-willing discussion. I'm going to be the timekeeper, so gentlemen, I'll cut you off if I have to. But we will start now with Mr. Hill.
Good afternoon, Friendship. Good afternoon. It's good to be with you this afternoon. It was an invitation that Judge Mintz Evans extended. Invitations from judges generally are compulsory, but knowing that it was Friendship, I was just happy to be back. So thank you. Judge Evans charged me with providing some history. When I learned of the topic, I thought one way of framing it was to describe my 10 minutes as from black codes and pig laws to Black Lives Matter, mass incarceration, and modern policing. That's a mouthful. It's challenging to do that in 10 minutes. But the thesis that I'm presenting is that this important conversation and to share a panel with these guys is really impressive. But the topics that we're going to be talking about are really topics that we've got to be engaged as a community, and it's months, years long. So I'm happy to be a part of this conversation. When I think about some of the names today of black men who have been killed in unarmed confrontations with the police, and we've seen some of the video clips of some of the extraordinary abuses that our community has suffered. History teaches that this is not new. The technology is new. The ability to see things is new. But the phenomena goes way back. And it's helpful to take one marker, and that's the Civil War, and to see how life was different before and after. When we think about jails and prisons, even folks of color think about folks of color. But before the Civil War, to the extent there were prisons, most of those prisons were occupied by white people. African Americans and African enslaved folks, their discipline, their sentencings were carried out by plantation owners and masters. It's remarkable to see that just 3, 4, or 5 years after the Civil War in 1870, only 10% of the country's jails and prisons were occupied by white people. What was the difference? From 100%, nearly 100% before the war, to 10% after. Because the judicial system that stood up after the war had a different purpose. There's a remarkable book that helps navigate this history, written by a white Mississippian, Douglas Blackman, Slavery by Another Name. It's an incredible read. And it's even not a better, but it's an enticing documentary. One could just look at it online. And what's powerful about the book and the documentary is it comes alive. All of the, first of all, those statistics are jarring. But to me, those statistics don't really fall into place if you don't put it in historical context. When I said black codes, that referred to those laws that popped up right after the war. So if you think of the war as ending in 1865 and the 13th Amendment coming in that same year, by 1866, 67, whole statutes had been promulgated. It's establishing new crimes, like walking along the railroad tracks at night, being about the city without employment, proof of employment. You had no letter from a master saying you work here. That was vagrancy. These are new charges. Raised voices in the presence of a white woman. These are new codes. Now, some of these codes were relatively sophisticated. They didn't necessarily say it was applicable only to black men. But raise your hands if you think they were enforced differently. And so when we think about whether it's loitering, whether it's Mr. Garner selling loose cigarettes on the streets of New York, yeah, there may be laws against that. And the laws may be colorblind. But the enforcement of that is very intentional. Yeah, so black codes, pig law. How many of you folks know what pig laws are? I'm going to pick on Spencer because I know he's a native of Mississippi. And well, I stand corrected, but it doesn't matter much because there were 3 or 4 states where you had these pig laws. And whether it was Mississippi or Alabama, you win the prize. Because other than Mississippi and Alabama, I believe it was only Georgia and Florida that had these laws. And essentially, these were black codes with a star on it. I mean, if you were black and you were accused of stealing something as minimal as a pouch of seeds or a baby pig, the value of the pigs or the seeds may have been $3, $4, $5. It didn't matter because after the war, this was now no longer a misdemeanor; it was a felony, and that was your ticket to the pen. It was just that switch. An 8-cent, 12-cent piece of hardware the sentence could now be hard labor. It was that difference in the charging and sentencing that occurred in the moments after the war. How's that time looking? Well, let's think about this. When we fast forward to the modern age, what comes of it? You've heard of zero tolerance. You hear it now on the border between Mexico and the United States. Well, we here in Charlotte heard it for years in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. Zero tolerance, right? It had one audience. It was the other, the scary. Well, this trick bag that our president is now reaching into, this is an old play. It was played, after the war, the war in 1866, and it's been played ever since. The good Reconstruction lasted for about 10 years, from 1866 to 1877, and then all heck broke loose when the federal government sort of surrendered and let the South go back to its own devices. Well, much of our criminal justice system is still stuck in that mentality. And, one of the things that I will sort of speed forward to, I've been spending the last 20, 25 years of my professional career combating the death penalty, working towards abolition. And it's not because there aren't bad crimes. It's not because there aren't bad killings. There are. And there have been horrible killings since the beginning of time. What is especially bad and evil about the death penalty is how much it cements that same history that started, that our conversation today started with black codes and pig laws. It's a little bit more complicated, a little bit more involved, but it's the same motivation, it's the same enemy. And when I look across this table, what I see is real hope. And what I see is real hope that we can do something different. We've got to do something big picture different. And Mecklenburg County has the opportunity to do something big picture different. When I was picking on Spencer in Alabama, part of it is North Carolina and Charlotte has always been a place of opportunity. If you discount the last 7 to 8 years where stuff has gone crazy in the General Assembly, North Carolina actually has a history of relatively enlightened stuff. The poll taxes, a tax on individuals, people, which was differently enforced. So if you look like you, and you're coming into the place, that they would check 5 years of tax history. They would look for your advance payment of your tax liability. A different citizen might come up and, well, you seem to be current, go on. It's that differential application that is the sin of our criminal justice system, and indeed much of our laws. But what is so promising about having a chief prosecuting authority, what's so promising about having mayors and political leaders, about sitting in a church like Friendship Missionary Baptist Church, is that the community in big pieces can start looking at the big picture problem. So when we talk about public safety, the only thing on our plate is not, do we need more police officers? Do we need to raise the salaries of police officers? Police officers may need salary increases. But if our objective is both public safety and racial equity, there are bigger pictures, bigger objectives out there. And it's time for Mecklenburg County and Charlotte to take a leadership role in this narrative. And I'll just say two things to end about the special obligation of friendship. Our law partner and mentor, Julius Chambers, this was his home church. He espoused a notion of the fullness of the civil rights agenda. That's what we've got to do here, and that unites voter registration, public education, all of which is under attack. The inability of economic mobility in Mecklenburg County is a disgrace. There are opportunities that our community has to take hold of these challenges, and that's what we should do. One last footnote is, in Montgomery, Alabama, just this month, or a month ago, Brian Stevenson, a friend and colleague, opened the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, the Legacy Museum, from mass incarceration, from slavery to mass incarceration. You've got to go. It raises the level of public education on these important subjects. It puts it in the national discourse. And each of the problems, public policy problems that we are wrestling with as a community, has as its roots what is exhibited in that museum. It's good to be with you here. Thank you, Judge, and thank you, panelists.
Good afternoon, Friendship. Again, I'm Spencer Merriweather, Mecklenburg County's District Attorney, and I've been commissioned with speaking with you today about bias in the criminal justice system. Now, often when we think about bias, particularly racial bias in our criminal justice system, we look at presentations like what we just saw. We think about the striking disparities between impact among white people versus black people. And to see numbers that are so striking, it would seem that to get to that number, it must be overwhelming, insidious racism, structural racism, intentional racism, even now, that gets you to that point. And while that may be true, what has the biggest impact is those things that sort of slip up on you. I'm going to give you just a quick example. I was a third-year narcotics prosecutor, and we often get around a table and talk about our cases to make sure that we're applying the law in a consistent way, in a fair way. And before me came a case of white kid doing mushrooms. He was about 19 years old and went to a concert, and everyone across the table said that this was someone who should be able to get the benefit of deferred prosecution, meaning that this person would get a 6 to 12 month program and then they wouldn't walk away without a criminal record, which seems like a fair thing to do for what is a mistake. I look at the coding of the case and see that this particular drug is a Schedule I controlled substance. I say, well, hold on. Because I'm looking over at these other 5 cases that I have with African American defendants for a Schedule II controlled substance of cocaine, which is considered to be a lower level of danger, a lower level of abuse, a lower level of impact upon the user. Why is it that we are treating this drug one way and this other drug the other way? When everyone kind of laughed at it a little bit and said, well, it's a bunch of kids doing mushrooms at a concert, what's the big deal? And I'm like, well, look at these 5 cases. These are just a couple people doing like little crumbs of cocaine like in the back of a schoolyard. Both have some questions to them, but why aren't we treating these 2 things equally? That is how you end up with a system that is structurally imbalanced, and that's how you end up with the type of statistics that you see. Because while you have someone who's racking up a record, when they commit a worse crime, the impact of the sentence that they'll receive is so much greater because of the little stuff that we were putting out on paper before. And so a system that seemingly is designed to be fair and equal and apply to everyone, if you have certain people that, as a result of it, have had a greater impact or more engagement with the criminal justice system, and on the little things have walked away with a bit more of a handprint from the criminal justice system, it's going to impact you later on, and you're going to see disparities like what you see up on the screen. All these things are important for those of us who operate the criminal justice system to recognize and then act accordingly. If I don't recognize that there can be a multiplier on certain people who are coming before the criminal justice system, that if there are things about a person's background, things about their medical history, that in one way may seem to mitigate conduct, but I'm missing those things with an entire other community of people, you will end up with a structurally imbalanced system with regard to race. The charge for all of us now is to do whatever we can to fix that imbalance. And much of that means that people who sit in a position like mine have to be asking different questions. We have to be digging deeper. The truth is that I could go through all of our processes, and we're trying to do this, and look for the things in our system that contribute to structural imbalance, that contribute to structural racism. We can fix all those. And yet, as long as we have disparities in our healthcare system, as long as we have disparities in our high schools, in our middle schools, in our elementary schools, as long as we have disparities in housing and job opportunity, we will end up in this reactionary part of our system, this criminal justice system. We will end up with disparities there as well. What I've got to do is account for that and try to find fairness and justice any way that I can. So that's the bleak news. But the good news is that I think that across the country you are seeing people who are looking for exactly those things. When you look at how we treat people who are in custody pre-trial, and we see 1,000 people who are African American who are in custody, and we see only about 300 people who are in custody who are Caucasian, you see that there's a marked difference. And what that tells you is that we're putting people are behind bars not because of the conduct they've committed, what they've done. They're in custody because they're poor. So all of us, partners in the criminal justice system, have been looking at, and I think you'll be hearing some interesting things in the weeks to come about ways that when we consider who ought to be in custody pre-trial, we're asking the question, is it about the conduct? Is it about the likelihood of the person to actually reoffend? Or is it about them being poor? I've been on record as saying that I believe that if you think a person is dangerous and is going to do ill after they've been accused of committing a crime, probably ought to be in custody. If you think they're not, then don't. Applying that theory to the way that we do pretrial custody in Mecklenburg County and across the state would keep the person who has stolen a couple toothbrushes in order to keep their dental hygiene from CVS from being in custody for 100 days. It will keep the person who has simply broken into a single car and made a stupid mistake and put them alongside someone who has been accused of first-degree murder. That's not what you want. That's not a system that results in, that's a system that actually features these structural imbalances that we're talking about. And that's what we're trying to fix. Anyway, I look forward to what the further panelists have to say. Thank you for listening.
Good afternoon. As has already been stated, my name is Frank Deese. I'm the current mayor of Marshfield, North Carolina. I've been the mayor about 13 years now, so got a little time on me. After I did about 10 years, I did about 10 and a half years in prison as a felon. And it's a funny thing though, because after I did 10 years as a mayor, someone asked me, well, are you going to run again? I said, well, I already did 10 years in prison. I already did 10 years as mayor. Can't I be free now? But as a young man, I had a lot of positives going for me. In high school, I was captain of the basketball team. I was in the honor society. I went to school doing integration. So when I went to high school, we actually went to the white folks school. And I was actually the first black vice president of that school. So I had a lot of positives going for me, but made some bad choices, made some real bad choices. And as I look back, now that I didn't see then, I got caught up in a system that was designed, just as Mr. Merriweather just said, where you get little bitty little things so that when you do something that's a little worse, you got all this already on you so that they can give you a bigger sentence, for that reason. When I'm going to move just a minute to the topic and about cradle to prison pipeline. That's a system. But in order to combat that system, the first thing we have to do is look to see what's the end game. Why that system? Why do they want to put you from the cradle to the prison? Because prisoners are the only group of people who can legally be discriminated against. You see, they have laws that says you can't discriminate because of age, sex, race, etc. There are no laws that says you can't discriminate against a prisoner. You can legally discriminate against a prisoner because you can deny him housing, you can deny him a job, you can deny all sorts of things legally. So because this is just a form of discrimination, legal discrimination, what we have to do, I feel like, is start dealing with the laws on this level to change that. If it was the law that you cannot discriminate because of age, race, sex, or prison involvement, or prison being an active prisoner, then there wouldn't be as much emphasis to put you in the cradle to prison pipeline, because in the end you don't have the same outcome. So that's just one theory of mine, and you'll see as I go along that I got a lot of theories. So that's just a theory of mine. But that's one of the things I have fought for. Now, since I've been out of prison, most of the things other than doing my duties as a mayor, and now campaigning for the House of Representatives, the one thing that I have focused on mostly is trying to reduce the recidivism rate and trying to work with reentry programs and talk with people who are in and people who just got out to say, look, we can, okay, that's happened. It wasn't right, but it's there. But we can do better now. Let's do better now. And and a lot of things are in place to help those ex-offenders, but at the same time, there are a lot of things that's working against them. So because of that, I also talk to legislators and people in politics, and I tell them that one thing all politicians understand is money. So, for instance, that going back to that first slide, and it showed the people in prison and state prisons. That breaks down to about 37,000 prisoners in North Carolina, in the state prisons of North Carolina. It costs a little over $30,000 per day, $30,000 per year per inmate. That comes to $1.1 billion that is being paid or being spent to keep people in prison. When I talk to legislators, I try to get them to see that money is better spent helping them become productive members of society so that they can get into the system and help pay some of these taxes. So, I mean, they understand that. So, thanks to books like The New Jim Crow and some other books that are out now, people are starting to wake up and look at these kind of things from these angles. And that's a good thing. But I've been charged with just talking about my story and how I was able to come from where I was to where I am. And what I say, especially when I talk with inmates and people who have been in prison, the first thing I tell them is, when you get out of prison, people don't trust you. So you need to understand that and accept it. People don't trust you because they don't know you. They know who you were when you went in. It's your responsibility. You have to build that trust. And so when I got out of prison, people have asked me questions like, well, when you got out of prison, how were you able to think about being the mayor when you just, most people just want to get a job? Well, I have to tell the truth. When I got out of prison, being a mayor was nowhere on my radar. I had one thing in my mind when I got out of prison. I'm not going back there. That was my whole focus. Because the one thing, and I thank the Lord for this, the one thing that happened to me while I was in prison was I changed my mindset. I adjusted my paradigm. You see, I tell people all the time, you don't have to change a person's behavior. Change his paradigm. If you change his paradigm, he'll change his own behavior. If you change how he looks at things and how he thinks about things, he'll change his behavior. So luckily, thankfully, I was able, through the help of the Lord, and no goodness of my own at all, but I was able to change that mindset. And so when I got out, again, I had one thought: I'm not going back there. So I was working a job. I got out of prison, I had $30 in my pocket and the clothes on my back. I went home to my mother's house, and that's where I lived. I had a job in Monroe. I live in Marshfield, which is about 10 to 12 miles from Monroe. I had a job in Monroe. I walked and thumb. And a lot of you all, we got some folks here who know what thumb is. When I'm talking to younger people, when I'm talking to like school kids, and I say I thumb, they have no idea what I mean. But I thumbed until I was able to save enough money to get a car. And I worked. I started a little business, a tax business. Thankfully, with the help of the Lord, I've grown that tax business now to 6 locations throughout North and South Carolina. I continued to work. I did my job. I took care of my mother as she was getting older. So I continued to work. Somewhere in that, though, and not necessarily intentionally, but somewhere in there, I started to build trust within the community. Because as I imagine people were saying, well, look at Frank's doing better. Frank's taking care of his mom. Frank's working every day. So this was happening, not necessarily me trying to do it. It was just as a natural consequence of doing the right thing. And so, I started to become, in the meantime, my daughter, which was born before I went to prison, had come to live with me, so it was my mother and my daughter. So somewhere in the middle there, somewhere down the line, I started to become a little more socially conscious. Joined the NAACP, I joined the Black Caucus, those kind of things. I started to pay attention to what was going on. Somewhere around 2004, I'm trying to get my dates straight. No, before that, I was volunteering, tutoring for some kids and donating some money and stuff and doing things to help out. And I was fortunate enough to win the governor's award for volunteering. And then after that, I don't know if you all remember a pioneer in Union County named Mr. Bazemore. People know Mr. Bazemore? Mr. Bazemore, who I say that in all sincerity, is and was a pioneer in Union County as far as helping Black people causes. But he came to me and he started to mentor me a little and get me involved. He'd take me over here to meet these people, take me over there to meet those people. And so in 2004, they asked me to run for county commissioner. Union County, at this point, Union County hasn't had a Democratic county commissioner in 30 to 40 years. And they had never had a Black one. So here was a Black Democrat from the eastern side of the county running for county commissioner. Well, we know how that went. So I lost, but I got the most votes on the Democratic side, but it just wasn't enough to overcome the huge number of Republicans in Union County. But I learned how to run a campaign. That was the good thing about that. So in 2005, I saw what was happening in my hometown, Marshall, which is the same town I lived in when I got in trouble. So people knew me, and they knew what I had been through or whatever. But I wasn't satisfied with the direction that the town was going. So, and that's why I backtracked to tell you my daughter lived with me then, because I said something about it. And as the young folks say, and not in a disrespecting way, she said something like, "We don't talk about it, be about it," you know? Anyway, so I ran for mayor in 2005. I won with 75% of the vote, and I have been the mayor since. I've been opposed. I've run 7 times. I've been opposed 4, and the last time was the closest race I've had, and I won with like 66%. So somebody say I must be doing something right. I say maybe nobody else wants it. I don't know. But at any rate, I have been the mayor. On a serious note, though, I thank the Lord. I thank the Lord for a lot of things that have happened with me. I know that the Creator is real. I know the Creator is real. And I've known it all my life, but as a young person, I sort of got away. I'm thankful that though I got away from the Creator, the Creator didn't get away from me. Amen. So as I continued and I moved forward and became ready, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. I just saw a time out. Obedience is better than sacrifice.
Good evening, family. Good evening. I call you family because I mean it. I love you. I'm going to love you enough to tell you the truth. At least the truth is as I know it. But before I do that, I ask my elders for permission to speak. As a young man, I never want to come in a room full of my elders and just start running my mouth. So do I have your permission to speak? Yes. I want to thank my ancestors, for without my ancestors, I wouldn't be here. Their sacrifices, their struggle, their example. We hear a lot and say whose shoulders I stand on, but I really mean it. If you look at my bio talks about my ancestry. I can tell you about all the wonderful things I've done and accomplished in my lifetime, but they're just a continuation of the wonderful and beautiful things that my ancestors done that preceded me. And I'm just carrying that baton, and hopefully I leave legacy, and I'm able to pass that on to my children and other people's children. Those who know me know I adopt all the children in the community as mine. I love them. I protect them as best I can. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on my story. My story is not unique. If you walk through the streets of Charlotte, North Carolina, you will hear my story time and time again, and all generations. I was a young man. But in connection to the conversation, I will say this. I can remember when I was going to J.T. Williams, and they ran out of room or something in school suspension. And they locked maybe 5 of us in a mop closet with some chairs, no supervision. Just sit there till we come get you. And I can just remember thinking like, it's for like prison. mop closet, no windows. And then, so when I hear the conversation about how certain aspects of the education system is preparing our sons and our daughters for prison, that always comes to mind how I got rid of my resource officer. I was the director and dean of students at Crossroads Charter High School before it closed. And I can remember the day I decided to get rid of my resource officer, people thought I was crazy because you got the so-called worst students in Mecklenburg County. Don't you need the police? I said, I don't need the police. I got 10 grown men in this building. And 10 grown black men can't handle black children. We need to quit our jobs, right? But the other thing was, I noticed that an officer is trained to be an officer regardless of what role he's playing at the moment in time. He worked for the school, but he couldn't stop being an officer. And so stupidity of bringing a blunt to school. And I said, oh, wow. And I had cuffs coming out in fights, and I get it. In fighting, but we ain't get to send nobody to jail behind it. We get to break this fight up, de-escalate the situation, and find some resolve. We might suspend them. We're going to bring these babies back, and we're going to keep on moving with our life. But we're not going to risk having a criminal record behind the discretion of the child. So I had to remove that element from my school because it wasn't his fault. It's what he was trained to do. It's how he was trained to respond. Right? Do I think they have their place? Absolutely. They just didn't have a place on my campus because there was nothing on my campus that I needed them for. And if I need them, I call them. Right? That's what they got 911 for. I ain't need you directly there, meddling in my affairs, right? Again, so that comes to mind and when we talk about this conversation of mass incarceration and education. We go back to the third grade reading score and the literacy rate of children. Let me explain something to you. My grandfather, I was partially raised in Goldsboro, North Carolina. I don't know if y'all know that little town east of here, Seymour Johnson Air Force Base. I lived at 1133 Olivia Lane for part of my life. My grandfather built 1133 Olivia Lane in 1955. He built it from 1955 to 1959, just working on Saturdays. No contractors, no loans, just sweat and labor, because mama said you can't work on Sunday because that's the Lord's day. Right? He was sharecropping and being a barber and doing handyman work and hunting during the week. So Saturday was the only day he had to build mama a house, because they stayed in the 2-room house on hospital land because Cherry Hospital wanted to keep some of their workers real close to them, so they would build these quarters on the property. And that's where they lived, in this 2-room. I didn't say 2 bedrooms because I don't want y'all to get me wrong to think that they lived in a 2-bedroom, because that would been doing too good, right? They had that 1 bedroom, then that open area with that pot belly heater. I don't know if y'all old enough. Y'all kind of younger than that. Y'all know nothing about no pot belly heater, but had that pot belly heater. And my grandfather vowed to my grandmother, her name was Elizabeth. He said, Lizzie, I'm going to build you a house. Now, my grandfather had this thing called a 3rd grade education. Now, we ain't talking about today's 3rd grade education with all this nice STEM, right? And these babies speak foreign languages in the 3rd grade. We talking about that old school. My grandfather could barely, not even enough to say he could read and write, but he knew how to work with his hands. And he knew he could build mama a house. And he started to go for a loan. He drew this blueprint out, and he walked into the bank. He asked the banker for a loan and showed him what he wanted to build and showed him the land that he wanted. And the good white man said, Mr. Smith, I sure like to give you a loan for a house, but I can't. And not because I just can't. I just can't give you a loan for a house that big on that side of town, because my grandfather decided he was going to stay where black folks wasn't. And Goldsboro was divided by a railroad track. We was very clear about what side you lived on, right? And he wanted to build a house right across the street from the housing projects. And we know how things depreciate and value. And that bank said, well, we give you a loan to build a house that big across the street from the projects. We might not. You mess up on this loan, we might be in trouble. So he told him, you keep your money. He didn't say it that nice, but we in church. And he commenced to working hard and building my grandmother's home. So when I hear to just think about literacy, somehow equating to going to prison, I can't buy it, because I watched a man not only build a home, but before he transitioned in 1981, he owned a barbershop, a convenience store, and a gas station. My grandmother used to sit at the dinner table, this nice new house she had, right, after dinner, and teach my grandfather. He wasn't that interested in learning how to read. He was interested in counting his money, though. Lizzie, teach me how to count. I don't need to beat me out of no money, right? And so this thing, I can't make the connection that somehow if a child is not literate by a certain age, that somehow that automatically kind of lines them up for incarceration. That don't make. I spent 7 years in incarceration here in North Carolina. I was falsely accused. I know a lot of people say that, but it's true, right? Falsely accused of robbery with a dangerous weapon, sentenced to 14 years, second mandatory in the state of North Carolina. And I ran across some of the most intelligent scholars I've ever ran across in my life, sitting in the state penitentiary of North Carolina. So I can't buy into this literacy thing, and you will end up in prison as a black man, right? There's something else at foot here, right? So I want to take you back and touch on, go back a little bit of history, if that's all right, right? I want you to understand and contextualize and put the proper perspective of what you're living in and why you're living in it, why mass incarceration is essential, why your baby's going to prison is essential. It's just not something that happens. It's something that's necessary. This economy was built on 3 things, and it still depends on 3 things. Right? We're gonna go there first. Y'all jump together. Y'all so smart, right? 1, drugs. Right? Nicotine is addictive. Tobacco is addictive. We've been running drugs in this country since day 1. Legal and illegal. Now you got all these commercials saying your eye twitched 3 times, you felt the chill up your back you might be suffering from, and we got the medication for you. We're gonna put you on something. This opium thing they so concerned about now, that's because you put people on something. Put your babies on Ritalin. We've been pushing drugs in this country, right? From day 1. That's 1. War. War. We're going to always be in war. You can call it a military conflict. You can call it the war on drugs. You can call it whatever. It's a war, and we've been in war since its inception. And as long as it's in existence, we will be at war. And that includes the selling of weapons of war. That includes being paid to train other countries for their war. We will always be involved in war as this country. Then let's get to why we're here, right? Massive, free, or cheap labor, right? It's essential to the very fiber of what America is. This is why you had the CCA, Correctional Corporation of America, who offered to buy 40 states' prison systems. We'll buy your prison systems. Damn, we got that kind of money. We're going to buy it, and we're going to guarantee that it stays full up to 90% for the 2 minutes, all right, for the life of the time. Let me speak, man. I got 2 minutes. It's a term that's going around. It ain't new, but it's just new. We using it. We flailing around. It's called white supremacy. And before it was called white supremacy, it was called manifest destiny. It had all the titles and terms. And here's what happened. Europeans looked out across the world and they realized that they was the minority. And they knew they was in trouble. And they felt that they was in trouble. And as a means of genetic survival, they set on a conquest against the entire globe for land, massive free labor, and resources. This is just the truth, right? This ain't the point of things in nobody. This is just what happened, right? And they were scared, and they still scared, because birth rates across the world for Europeans is negative. And so what you got that you're just calling white supremacy is not just that simple. It is a system that ensures not only their survival, but the survival of generations to come. And that means other people have to suffer for our survival. Other people will suffer, and they are expendable across the globe. And unless you find a way to create a countervailing system for your very survival, because my family, you are in trouble. Your children and children's children are in trouble. I don't care how many black faces they put in white spaces. This system will turn on and keep rolling. There's 4 phases, and I close, Mama. I got you. You got to shut me down, right? There's 4 phases to the system. There's establishment of the system. There's the maintenance of the system. There's the expansion of the system. And there's the refinement of the system. Every time you think you've made a gain, they've only refined the system. They found a way to do it better and different without you feeling like you're suffering so much. So I hope we can have a real conversation, family.
And all of you all followed instruction. Thank you. Now, before we start with our questions, and I know we have a lot, we have a young lady who wants to speak to us briefly about a program that she has here in Charlotte. Corbin Cummings, if you would come up, please.
Good evening, everyone. I'm sorry, I couldn't feel the energy. Good evening, everyone. Yes, my name is Corbin. I'm a member here at Friendship Missionary Baptist Church, and I'm also a student at Appalachian State University. I'm a second-year student. I'm currently a double major in political science and economics, and I'm here today just to talk about what youth empowerment means and what engagement means. So with that being said, this summer I've had the opportunity of being a part of Ignite NC, which is a statewide nonprofit organization under the Southern Vision Alliance, which is its mission is to make sure that youth, meaning 18 to 30-year-olds primarily, but youth is educated and has the tools to be leaders in the community that they are in, primarily Black and Brown communities. But we teach youth about what it means to be civically involved, what it means to be politically and socially aware. We also do voter registration drives, so Youth Revival. Last week, we got almost 20 youth registered to vote. We also got more than 70 youth interested in social and civic and political engagement. So that is what we're trying to do here in Charlotte. We are the Charlotte Fellows. I'm here with my organizer who is sitting with me. But also, one of the things I had the opportunity to do was intern for District Court Judge Yolanda Trotman. One of the things that she taught me is about how the system in Charlotte-Mecklenburg County cannot always be as it seems sometimes, in that when you're working to dismantle a system, it takes a village. So what I'm asking you here today is to believe in me and what we're trying to do is just to see that youth here are engaged, we are listening, we're mobilizing, and we believe in what we're doing. And if you are interested in what we're trying to do, we will be over here with cards, and we're also doing the Black Census Project, because it just seems like when it comes to the conversation about what it means to have statistics and data and research, Black voices and Black bodies always seem to be excluded from that. So if you're interested more about what we have to say and what we have to offer, my name is Corbin Cummings. I'm here with my organizer, ACG. So please see us, and please understand that, again, youth are here, we are mobilizing, and we are ready to get involved. And we have always been here, we will continue to be here, because this movement is important, and the revolution has always been important to us. So thank you again for your time, and thank you.
Okay, so our first question is to Mayor Deese. You stated you changed your mindset while in prison. In that environment, was there a program or a specific incident that was a catalyst for that change? If so, can we implement it in schools?
When I went to prison, there wasn't a program. They have implemented a lot of new programs since I go back and speak to the prisoners now. There are a lot of good programs going on now. But when I went through at that particular time, they had some programs in minimum custody, but I was in maximum custody at the wall. Now the incident, I can speak of the incident that led to the process, because changing my mindset was a process. It didn't happen overnight. So the incident that led to the beginning of that process was I jumped on a guard. But that went all right for a minute until the rest of them got there, and then it didn't go so well. So very quickly, they jacked me up, handcuffed me, took me out of the area, and took me up to West Control office, through the reception, through another office, out a side door, down a little hallway. There was threw me down in a chair and left. Well, as I was sitting there, just sort of looking around in this hallway, handcuffed, this door opens, and you couldn't even tell it was a door because it was sort of in with the wall. You didn't know it was a door until it opened. And when it opened, there stood the biggest white boy I ever saw in my life. Now understand, at that time I'm about 21 years old. I probably weighed a good 165, 170 pounds. This guy was every bit of 7 feet tall and probably weighed 350 pounds. So he takes me in there. I find myself in a little 10 by 10 room with this captain standing here, this white lieutenant standing here, and this black guard that I jumped on. The captain had a billy club. He had a blackjack. The lieutenant had a billy club, and the other guard had a stick about 2 feet long. And I'm standing here handcuffed. So now my mind is in overdrive, saying, okay, so can I at least take one of them with me? That's where my mindset was at that time. Now, understand, I was a young man. I was 21 years old. I had been in prison then for about 2 years, a little over 2 years. But I went to prison the same way I was in the street. Cocky, arrogant. I didn't want to hear that, so it was all about me. So that's how I felt at that particular time. Now thank the Lord, and the Lord is always, let me say this real quick, and I know the Lord loves him some Frank Deans. He just loves some Frank Deans. Because he sent somebody to get me. I promise you that. I'm standing here with these 3 men, and especially the captain, he was as red as the writing on that card. He was just that living. He was ready to do some damage. And the door opens, and this black lieutenant walks in and says, "Oh, excuse me, I didn't know anybody was in here." And starts back out. And I'm like, "I'm leaving." Anyway, and I say it, listen, it was real serious, and I tried to make it comical a little bit, because, but at that time it was just tense. But he came back in, he got me, he set me outside, he went back in and talked with those people in there. He came back, he took me back up to the Worst Control office and told me, "Don't let me catch you over here anymore." And he left. The captain was still there, that he came out, he was so mad that they locked me on death row for like 2.5 weeks. Now, I wasn't there to die, but I was there with people who were there to die. And in doing that, let me say to you, if you think prison, death row is a prison within itself, and to lay there for 2.5 weeks listening to men who praying, repenting, whose only cellmate is death, who talks to death in the morning when they get up and in the night, that will give you a new perspective. And so I laid there for 2.5 weeks, and though I wasn't there to die, it made me start to think about my death, and subsequently my life. So then I started to have some good, honest conversations with myself. Because people lie to themselves. Don't lie to yourself. Because that's what I did when I was young. So many times we lie to ourselves. But I learned to be honest with me, if nobody else. Be truthful to yourself. And in those honest conversations, that's where my process started.
So for me, and so many like me, because I actually asked this question, because when I work with boys, I'm trying to find this formula, especially with our boys, what's going to get them to turn around, what's going to get them to see it. And it's the thing that we say very loosely, is about a knowledge of self. but it's a cultural awareness. I promise you, 8 out of 10 men that I talked to who took the journey that I took and turned it around and didn't go back, I asked them, what was it? 8 out of 10, on the top 3 things had autobiography of Malcolm X as one of the most impactful and influential things in their life. And it wasn't just the book, it was the story, the journey of a man, right? And so it's something magical about knowing who you are from a cultural perspective and owning that changes behavior. And that's something that we can definitely start to work very hard at getting into our school systems is that cultural responsiveness and cultural education, and not just history, not just dates and events, but what it actually means to be African, what it actually means to be a black man in this world, and or woman, pardon. But to understand that's something we can infiltrate the schools with, whether it's supplementary or directly, and we got to get more schools, because African American Studies is an accepted credit, but most schools don't adopt it as part of one of the classes offered. Right?
Okay, so you guys are ahead of the mark. We only have so much time, and I'm not going to be able to ask all of your questions, but following up on Mr. Santiago's last comment, Mr. Hill, what are middle and upper class African Americans failing to teach our youth?
Part of my response is a measure of who I am. So when I think of who I was when I was 13, 14, 15, in some ways I was emancipated. I thought of myself as emancipated. And I thought of myself as politically aware, I thought of myself as having world vision and one that I would have to chase down. And I think, I'm actually optimistic. I'm seeing more young people like the 2 young folks here who are running this program. I am seeing more of that than there was 10, 15 years ago. So I'm actually optimistic in terms of where the kids are. I think perhaps if parents need to be more active and engaged with the young folks is to connect them to that mission. The history that we're trying to sketch out here and the history that African American Studies programs teaches, that's not a history that folks can just sort of fall into. And so we're not connecting the dots in the schools, and parents and we need to know that history so that we can make it plain to our kids that history is important for them to know. Unfortunately, I was stimulated by my daughter and son who went to Duke and studied African American history. I was an aware adult and a professional who lived and worked in civil rights, and I still didn't know a lot of the nuances about the pig laws, the black code, the nuances between Reconstruction, the end of Reconstruction. I thought Woodrow Wilson was a progressive guy. They named the school after him at Princeton. I thought Teddy Roosevelt was this heroic Westerner who preserved the Badlands and the national parks. But to know that he sort of looked the other way at peonage, that the mines in Alabama were where they had convict leasing, and all of U.S. Steel. So the great wealth of many of these mining companies grew out of convict leasing and peonage policies. None of that is taught in schools, and we are sitting here with our kids thinking that somehow our ancestors were lazy, they didn't know how to make the best of the end of slavery, all these opportunities. We're not as committed to the work ethic as our white ethnic neighbors are, and the Irish did this, and the Polish did that, and the Jews lived in ghettos, and look at you, you're still where you... Well, if you don't understand the history, and that slavery didn't end in 1865, it just transitioned. And it transitioned from 1866 to 1877, then from 1877 to 1903, from 1903 to World War I. Each one of these periods, there was another transformation of slavery but it was still the same thing. One historian says slavery didn't end until 1942. And he marks it from a decision in Texas where they shut the door on peonage, that you could be thrown in prison for debts. And that was a federal court decision where finally, and from that point on, the federal court was enforcing this prohibition. So for 80 years after the 13th Amendment, there was still a form of slavery going on. And I want to embarrass us here, but how many of us know that history to that level so that we can teach it to our 13-year-olds and instill that kind of pride?
Okay, and Mr. Merriweather, this next one is for you. Please explain what rights a person gives up when he or she becomes a convicted felon, and also explain what rights are restored after they have completed their incarceration or probation or post-release supervision.
And I will start with the first. It is a common belief in North Carolina that someone who has been convicted of a felony does not have the right to vote. And in fact, in North Carolina, once you are off probation, once you've completed an active sentence and are off post-release supervision, you can have your rights, your citizenship rights restored. It's literally at that point, it's as easy as filling out a form to do so, just registering to vote. This became poignantly clear to me when I was working the polls in 2008. I was actually at East Stonewall AME, and a guy came to me, and his name was not on the voter rolls, and he said, "Oh no, I just got out of prison." I was like, "Well, maybe that's the problem. Like, you might be still been released." He says, "No. I took and served my full sentence so that I could vote today." And that one stick with me. Makes you realize just how important it is, how important your citizenship rights are when someone is willing to serve out extra time away from their family in order to exercise them. As far as the rights that people are excluded from when they have been convicted of a felony, there are some out there, but they're not nearly as many as what we as a society have decided to inflict upon people who have been convicted of a felony. One of the reasons as DA I've been trying to sort of advance this notion of giving people the opportunity to expunge their record under the law and making sure that is made easy and available to people is because if you see that there are people within our government who say, no, we should be giving people every opportunity to sort of remake their lives and every opportunity to get gainfully employed and to get housing, then employers get a chance to see that, and people who provide housing and education get a chance to see that, and that becomes a part of their societal ethic, because right now it's not. Right now, people think, well, this is way too much of a risk to put this person who made a mistake 15 years ago in their life and they were a kid to give them an opportunity to job, housing, and education, and that's a mistake. And not only that, it freezes the mobility of an entire community of people who have been disproportionately impacted by the criminal justice system. So we've got to get, again, larger point being that government and the law hasn't done nearly as much to restrict the rights and privileges of those with records of criminal conviction than we as a community and society have, and that needs to change.
All right, this next question is for each of you, if you would like to. Has our current condition and the various systems we are against produced the case for separation, not segregation, over immigration?
This week? I'm joking. Yes. The simple answer, yes, it has produced the case forward. Whether that's in people's reality or not, that's one thing, but it definitely is a case for it. You know, like I said, growing up in rural North Carolina, I can see where you got the old black high school is either now closed down, it might be a community rec center, some fraternity might have got it and made it into an event hall, but we gave up so much of our infrastructure and institutional controls because the ice was colder on the other side. So many people benefited from us integrating their school systems academically and athletically, got better because we came. We got much of nothing from it, but a lot of lost institutions. Now we're fighting now to save our communities from gentrification, now we're begging for community centers and schools in the community. At one point in time, we had it. So I think sometimes in order to heal, whether this seems realistic or not, sometimes in order to heal, you have to go off. Be by yourself, reestablish yourself. But we can't do that. That just sounds simple. We can't do that if we're not serious about building. Just think about Babies for a Role, right? And this conversation that Valentine is having about unincorporating from and becoming its own. Babies for a Role can do that. Now, don't get me wrong, that's a stretch. I get it. Something that's already been incorporated to unincorporate and become its own kind of sovereign district, if you will. But it's the last black community in Charlotte, North Carolina. You lose it, and you lose everything historically you've seen in this city that represents and looks like you. The holdup is a lot of y'all own your home. I grew up, my grandmother went to Friendship across the street, right? I saw Reverend Jones come in. I'm that old, but I saw him come in, right? So I've been here, right? I seen it. I seen the changes. And we could have it, but we just give up everything to be fair and right to everybody else. And they're going to do what Brooklyn get to be a museum. They're just going to give you a nice museum and tell you how nice Brooklyn used to be. Right? And that's what they're going to do with all of your community. It's going to be, because a museum is a spoils of war. It just shows what the conquerors have done and what they gathered from the spoils of war, and now it's on display. So, yes, there is an argument for separation, but it's no need of us separating if we don't have the proper infrastructure and institutions in place to sustain ourselves, because what's going to happen is we'll just come running back.
Anyone else like to tackle that?
Well, sure. And I don't entirely disagree with the premise of the question, but I do think that true integration means that we have lost the character of what is ours. And I think kind of baked into that question is that we have to actually give up something in the first place to have an integrated society. And I don't necessarily think that's true. An integrated society does not mean that any of us subdue our culture, subdue our heritage, subdue our community. We don't have to do that. And I think to get exactly what Adrian was speaking of, there is something to be said for maintaining the character, but I don't necessarily think that that requires a sense of separation. It just means being strong about who we are and what is important to us. And I think that is a part of real integration of communities in the society.
I would build off on what Spencer says. I have a hard time thinking about separation as the going forward policy. That's someone who, when I was a teenager, there was notions of separation. I consider myself a member of the 60s, even though I was really young in the 60s. But there were separatists. And my sense is, if you go down to Alabama to the museum that was just opened last month, the issue is, we're all living in the dark. This country's public policy, the criminal justice system, is really based on a racial narrative of white supremacy and inadequacy of the African American community and individuals. It's that needs to be broken, and we need to break that in our community, and we need to break that narrative as a national narrative. And I think we're now looking at much of our community has been thrown away as disposed, and people are saying we can't do that. No, well, that's happening now because we're forcing this conversation. We're challenging that narrative. And to the extent we can continue to challenge that narrative, Mecklenburg County, again, I think has an opportunity. We've got leadership in positions, and it isn't just a matter of putting black faces in slots that have always been held by white individuals. We are now in a position that we can challenge the narrative, and there are enough people in the community that seem to be woke to that, and we have young people who seem to be committed to that. I think that stands to profit us a lot more than a separatist agenda.
Thank you. We only have time for 2 more questions, so I'm going to ask you all to limit your answers just a little bit. This was the first question I got, and it wasn't clear to me, so I got a clarification. What role do you believe cisgender black men play on this systemic issue? The questioner has noticed a growing trend of separation due to classism, and straight black men often enforce many of the isms of oppression. I'll need to repeat that. So it's cisgender.
I didn't heard the question, but cisgender is basically someone who conforms to their gender at birth. So anyone who was born female and they are identified as a woman, they are considered to be cisgender rather than being non-binary or being trans. Anyone have a question about that? Non-binary is binary.
If the panelists understand the question, take a shot.
But can you ask me one more time?
Okay, now that I know it's cisgender and not cisgender, what role do you believe cisgender black men play on this systemic issue? I've noticed a growing trend of separation due to classism, and straight black men often enforce many of the isms of oppression.
Try to keep it short. You can't, be a champion for liberty and freedoms for people if you're not willing to let people be who they are, plain and simple. And that requires us to do it not only in the case of African American men, but it means it's across the board, regardless of gender identity and the like. So.
Do you want me to ask the question in a different way? I'll ask you a different way. So basically, the question is saying, basically, I don't know if it was the Wall Street Journal what described straight black men being equivalent to like how white men, And so what I've seen is like how straight black men often impose some of the isms that white men impose. So what do you think? How do you see that, one, and two, how can we debunk it? So black men that like view themselves as straight black men get off of this pedestal and actually integrate with folks beneath them.
That's an attack on black male masculinity.
Yeah, so I may not answer it directly, but I'll answer it. So here's the thing. One, there's no comparison between black men and white male oppressive systems. We don't have the power to keep anybody, regardless of how they identify themselves, from getting jobs, getting into schools, like living a healthy. We can have our own biases, right? We can choose maybe personally not to do business with you, but regardless of what our opinion is, we don't affect your lifestyle, right? So we can have that. The other thing is, too many times we're divided on these isms and on these gender, whether it's feminism or anything. When they came down to bomb Tulsa, they didn't separate like, oh, when you go over there, like they bombed black people, right? When they come to destroy communities, they come to destroy everybody in the community. We got one issue. We need to stop dividing ourselves on so many issues. That's how we get thinned out and we don't stay strong. Because we thinning ourselves out. Look, sister, if something go wrong with you out in these streets, I'm not going to ask no question about how you identify with your gender. I'm as a black man coming to save you as the best I can because something is happening to you, right?
I'm sorry, that's not the question.
I got it. No, I get your question.
So, okay, wait a minute, ma'am.
No, I get your question. Is that are black, straight black men being a suppressor to, I'm just making clear that I clear.
Stop. Ma'am, if you would have a seat, please. I need you to take your seat, please. Now,
I just want to make sure.
ma'am, I need you to have a seat now. Thank
We
you.
can talk in the parking lot.
Okay. Folks, we have another segment that we need to go to. And so this question has taken up the time for the other question that we're going to ask. And I appreciate and I ask that you all thank this panel once again for their time. And what we have been attempting to do at each of these sessions is to have the audience participate in an action item. This is an educational process, but we want you to do something with what you're learning. So I'm going to turn this over now to our next presenter, who is going to give you the action item steps for today, and our panelists can come down. So thank you all for your time.
Good afternoon. My name is Gerard Jones, and we are going to do an action, but it's kind of similar to what just took place, where folks get the chance to talk to one another. But also talking to one another, we don't want to necessarily talk at one another. So we're going to go through some norms of what this group discussion will look like. Because we found that actions you can do a couple of different things with actions. You can do an external action or you can do an internal action. An internal action is something kind of revolutionary, but simple, where folks just get to know each other. And through sharing stories, through sharing a sense of communal empathy for one another, by hearing how each one of our community members are impacted by the subject at hand, what we're talking about today, in the Civics 101 series in general, mass incarceration, specifically the cradle to prison pipeline. And so in a moment, we'll be splitting up in groups of 8. If we can do groups of 8, as many groups as possible, groups of 8, that would be awesome. And if we have we're going to have volunteers on the slide. So a few of the group norms as we go through. So it'll be groups of 8, and we'll need a volunteer to serve as a facilitator. Thank you, sir. Some of the norms for our group discussion. For a second, some of the norms of our group discussion. As we pose those 2 questions at the bottom. Okay, I can read them all. So we'll have one facilitator to kind of help control the conversation, and we're going to be asking those 2 questions at the bottom. Thank you, sir. But when we go through those questions, some of the group norms that we ask for folks to kind of adhere to is feel free to ask follow-up questions respectfully. The second one, truly take time to listen to sentiments and hopes that are shared when folks are responding to the questions. Third, please pull in your learnings and reactions from this conversation that we just had and also previous Civics 101 sessions that we had, as well as your life. That's where those stories should play out a bit more. And then be intentional about building a sense of community. Because we live in such a separate society, this is going to be a unique experience where folks get the chance to have a soul-on-soul experience. And then allow time for others in your group to share as well. So no grandstanding. Please be mindful of the time and allow others in your circle community to express themselves as well. And so if we can do groups of 8 as strong as possible, we can have a group right here and a group right. So 3 groups along this side, 3 groups along this side, and 1 group in the center and the back. And feel free to arrange your chairs in such a way too. So groups of 8, 3 on one side, 3 on the other side, and 1 in the middle.
And if we can have one of the panelists trying to go into one of the groups, we'd greatly appreciate it also. This exercise will take 20 minutes. 20.
I'm just an old believer, but God bless you. No, thank you, sir. I think you'll approve it. I understand you said you got several businesses or something. Yeah, well, I've got one business, several very honest, very, I don't know how to say it. Okay. She believes in helping people. That's one of the issues. Thank you, I'm serious. Okay. I enjoyed this. Thank you.
Test. Hey, everyone, I forgot to mention one critical point. The whiteboards that you have, please capture some notes with the whiteboards that you have and white paper that you have. You should have a chart paper near you, so please capture some notes about what actual legislation would you all draw up if you could, and what reforms you could draw up if you could. So we're asking for you to jot that down on that chart paper next to your group. Hey, if I can get everyone's attention real quick, there's been a reoccurring question. So the first question is just about sharing stories to get to know the people in your group. The second one is when you actually list the reforms that you all will put in place. That's what the chart paper is for. So the first one was just sharing stories. The second was actually listening. Thank you.
Very concerned from New York. My son, always family members have been. Going over to the mall. And then of the group, one person started picking at something. And when my son died, to stop them from picking, and the house, then all the others, they ran. Even the nephew. And I didn't even know that's what my son in jail. And he was probably about 14 years. Thank God, there was some good people, we had to go to court, we had to get a lawyer. What hell? I'm so sorry. I know he was trying to break up the fight. And stop it. I told the other people, they all went. And I didn't even know. My great had to find out. So yes, and that is why today, as a former county executive, I will fight and give us in order to help so many other parents and everything. So yes, it's very tough. So for me, the reform, we have now is a staple of being in party.